Welcome to my teaching learning session. Coming to the last unit, which is unit 2 of Introduction to Social Psychology. I am SONAL Singh, who's taking care of psychology courses for you for BA. Today, talking about the last unit where we come down to culture, self, and social behavior, we now start relating to how is your self and your behavior associated to culture. Culture becomes a major construct here. So let's begin with understanding what is culture. Culture usually is not a very single and simple entity, it is a multi thing. When we talk about culture, it talks about not only the language, the people, the regulating norms within a section of people and region of people, but also these are some subjective aspects like words, beliefs, attitude, roles, norms, and values that one set of system consists of. And culture is something which in our society, when we talk about an Indian society, we are multicultural people. So, speaking of that, Triandis in 1972 defined culture includes some objective aspects such as tools, some subjective aspects, subjective because it differs from people to people, which is belief system, the stereotypes, the attitude, the norms, and the values that we hold. Culture also has some essential features, which is if you digress from one culture to the other, there are going to be features which are going to be common in all the culture. One is that culture is a dynamic in nature. So when we talk about culture, it will never stay stagnant. It will show tendency to change. How? Because culture with every passing population has new trends, new attitudes, new values that comes into place. So that is dynamic nature of the culture. Then we talk about system of rules. Various behaviors, rules, attitudes, and values in a culture do not exist in isolation, which means when we talk about a culture, there are people. People create new norms, people create new attitudes, people create new values that are perfectly fit to their age trend or probably perfectly fit to their set of identity as a culture or as a set of identity as a group that they hold. So they always have a system of rule. Norms are an essential part of culture. Groups and units, when we are speaking about culture, we all know that being a multicultural society ourselves as in India, we have multi groups which are formed. So what does culture gives us? Culture gives us different groups and units. So when we talk about different groups and units, it suggests that it does bifurcate like a tree into smaller units, smaller groups, and when we take it in a in a perspective of individuals within groups, the units that reflect cultures are specific individuals within a group. So when we talk about groups, groups are collection of people and units are individuals who are within the culture, ensuring that there is a survival of the group also. So until, when we talk about a region, let's take an example. When we talk about Delhi, that we are saying that Delhi NCR has a multicultural area. It has multi groups, and every group comprises of units, which are people. Now, these people ensure that the survival of the group goes on. How? They associate more people of their ideology, of their thought process. They might associate their own offspring, which is their own children. So, groups and units allows the survival of the group, which is a very essential part for it to be there. So, a culture can only survive when the units and groups keep growing after every time and now. Then coming to that, culture also impacts our psychological and our behavioral components. So how does it impacts our behavioral component? Culture actually gives us norms. We just spoke about it. It gives us the rules to conduct and behave. So when we talk about rules to conduct and behave, it will impact the way you talk, the way you greet people, the way you are interacting with people, and the way that you are trying to conduct yourself within your group. So there is an unsaid set of norms which are created, which impacts the way you behave, the way you think, the way you conduct yourself. Also, psychologically, culture has a huger impact. Psychologically, in terms of the kind of thought process that we hold in our mind. So, when we talk about behavior, psychological impacts tend to happen before that. So, the kind of attitude that we form, the prejudices that we talk about, the stereotypical thoughts, that's all coming from the cultural thought that we have from the group that you're a part of. So first an attitude is created which the group gives you. We start thinking and reasoning and analyze that attitude. We create a stereotype probably about other people or probably about our own group. And then there are prejudices and then further behavior comes into play. The way you behave, the way you talk to people, the way you conduct yourself. Also, discrimination is also a part of behavioral component. If there's a stereotype which is formed for another group, we have behavior as a discriminating component over there. The last feature, one of the few last features of culture is that it's individually different. We all know we all comprise of different cultures, so it is highly different. I'm sure one culture has distinct features from the other culture despite they are in the same region. Delhi is a similar region, but we have so many cultures here. So they all are different to one another. Also, the difference also comes into play because of the generational shift that we show. So every 5 years later, there is a generational shift. There are going to be new ideas, new concepts, new ways of conducting yourself. One of the biggest example has been pandemic. Before pandemic, I the online classes like this, being on air, having all the time, all your work on the on technologically based, dependent or codependent was never a thought. But post pandemic, our education system, our work alliances, everything, even smallest of information, we had application for all the bank setups also to make our work easy. This has been a huge generational shift which now has moved to this generation, and another 5-10 years later we'll have some other shift. So generation also causes this transmission and this individual difference. Also, inevitable changes over time. Although culture is believed to be relatively stable over time, but it does go inevitable change. COVID again is a big example. Our educational system was always conventional. The way we have a board, class 10th and class 12th board, that has always been a conventional setup. Then board allowed us to give an internal paper, which is online. On the basis of that, children were assessed, and there was no conduction of a final board paper. So this was an inevitable change. Is an inevitable thing. It might happen anytime. We do associate stability with culture, but some historical, some such pandemic changes does bring about changes which are not something that we can control. So whole in all, what is a culture? Culture comprises of attitudes, food, religion, faith of people, behaviors, thoughts and rituals, customs, language, and belief systems that we have. It is different from one person to the other. It is relatively stable but can bring about changes. Transmission takes place highly of the culture from one generation to the other. So this is what culture is. Now we will associate how does our self and our social behavior changes because of this culture. Speaking of the first cultural aspect, which is the first social behavior that happens in culture, is enculturation. Enculturation is a process by which aspects of our own, which is our own culture, are transmitted from one generation to the other. So, enculturation is transmission within your own culture. We are not talking about interculture, we are talking about intra-culture, which is within ourselves. So, enculturation is a process which refers to aspects, changes in the aspect of our own culture, which transmits from one generation to the other. So it's simple transmission from one generation to the other of your own culture, and there are various agency for the same. Enculturation's major aspect is observation. It's not there on the screen. You can please make a note of it. Observation is one of the most important feature of enculturation. Why? Enculturation mostly happens in Indian society. We see our little children, our siblings, copy from us, imitate from us, observe us, and learn something. Probably cooking is something which a child has learned watching her mother, or probably a child has learned watching her father. And management and strict organization of the workplace, a colleague has learned from his senior merely on the basis of observation. So, enculturation speaks about observation that we talk about. So, when we speak of observation to be a part of something which is enculturation, it's the key. It's the key. Without observation, there is no enculturation. Now, there are agents. How does it happen? It happens through various agency. Parents and offsprings, because parents and offsprings are our primary group, a group that we interact day and night, a group that we are very closely bonded with. We see them every now and then, which is like I'm sure most of us in Indian societies are living with our parents. So primary group has frequent interaction. It is least permeable, which is you cannot disown your family, you cannot disown your siblings, you will always be tied with blood. So that's something which is a primary group. Then we come to something. as understanding how parents and offspring comes to be so important agency of enculturation. So a hierarchy of three parental goals was given by Levine in 1977. Levine stated that there are some goals which only parents provide to children, which becomes and is a very essential part of socialization and enculturation. The first is the obviously the offspring's physical survival. As the child is growing up from their toddlerhood to their pre-primary and their early childhood, parents are always teaching children to hold up challenges, which is a positive appraisal of your situation. You never think things as harm and threat. The more threatful you will take your environment to be, your physical survival is something which is always going to be you always question your existence. So first parental goal that parents teach to children is something which is parental goal as in survival, making the child be aware that they can survive no matter whatever the physical conditions are. So helping children understand that survival is possible in any condition. This is majorly given by parents. And we need to know that the first 3 years of life is so important that the impact of parental learning on us has a huge, huge impression throughout our life. So, whatever that you've learned in the first early years of your life will have an impact on all your years of your later life. Then we have fostering of behaviors that promote self sufficiency, which is parents and even siblings at times foster and create and make you learn behaviors which will support self sufficiency, because which support independence, which tells you how to work through through a crisis situation, through a situation where you can work alone, manage alone, organize alone. So self sufficiency is something which is promoted again by parents. Then obviously there are other things which is values and morality comes from parents. The code of conduct of what is right and what is wrong in society actually is coming from parents. Parents is the first, as I said, the first group that we interact with. So when parents is our first group of interaction, which we essentially are interacting, and they are the window which is leading us to the external world. So whatever values, whatever code of conduct, whatever right and wrong our parents have given us, that is something which we are going to reflect outside. So yes, they do become a huger medium to understand that what are the correct values of the culture, how do you need to present yourself, what is the right and wrong in our society. Also, some studies which has been conducted cross-culturally show some differences in parenting. They do say that different culture can, give out different kind of parenting, which indicate that there are going to be parental goals which are very different from culture to culture. So, essentially, Levine stated that these goals are going to be something which is stable across culture. But if the parenting styles are different, we are going to study about parenting styles. If the parenting styles are different, in the same culture, you will see that the child might understand different goals or might have different goals. So these studies also examine to the extent the various parenting styles that lead to cultural differences on various psychological construct. So some studies also stated that because of the fact that there are parental differences in the way the child is being reared, there are going to be differences the way the child learns culture and the way the child behaves in a society which is filled with cultural values and cultural units, groups, and systems. Now, coming to what are these parental styles that we have, Dinah Baumrind, 1971, added, which was further added by Maccabee and Martin in 1983. They suggested us four parenting styles, which are something that you can associate to. So let's learn about the parenting style. Also, speaking of enculturation, being the first social behavior that happens in culture and self, and the second is acculturation. We'll come up to their difference in a while. Now, continuing with the parenting styles that we have an authoritative parenting styles, authoritarian parenting style. Authoritarian parenting style is like dictatorship. It is a kind of dictatorship where, like when we talk about, Hitler, Adolf Hitler was a dictator. And when we talk about he dictating the entire world, there was lesser of warmth and there was more of control, more of dominance, his word being the last word. That's how a family function when it is functioning under authoritarian style, which is the parents' values, the parents' statements, the parents' rules are going to be the last rules. They're never going to be negotiated. They have very high control, which is a sense of dominance that comes into play. The child cannot go against the rule given by the parent. Yes, there is lesser love and warmth, which is associated with authoritarian parenting style. Then we come to something which is permissive, permissive and with extreme high amount of style. So this is like letting go of your child. It's like letting your child go off in terms of very high warmth. You allow children to do everything, so it lacks control. When we talk about low control, it completely lacks control. So when we speak about lacking control, they might allow their child to decide on the biggest of decisions, even if the child is 4 years old. So child says, I want to join this activity. The parent might say, you decide if you want to. There is an extracurricular activity circular that is coming, which we need to check on the basis of parental resources. Will parents be able to afford that? But the child gets the liberty of picking and choosing anything and deciding their own values, deciding their own norms, deciding their own rules. So there is very high warmth, which is the parents tends to leave it on to the child to decide. And yes, there is extremely low control or lack of control. Then we come to authoritative style. Authoritative style, in comparison to the other former ones that we did, tends to be one of the best, which says high warmth and high control. So these are parents which will tell you that why a rule is coming, why the rule is important, and why do you need to follow it. An extreme amount of warmth in terms of logic given to the child, the right kind of punishment and rewards given to the child that tells them that obviously parenting involves both control and both love. So you will find these children to be very independent, very logical. They will not have issues of any, they leastly have issues of anxieties within them in comparison to the above former one that we did, which was authoritarian and permissive. Also, speaking of the negligent style is low warmth and low control. These are parents who, like the term suggested, negligent parental style. They tend to neglect child both in terms of control and both in terms of love and control. Whereas when we compare it to the permissive one, permissive had very high warmth but very less control. Here, the parent does not have probably time. This could be a family setup where the parents are dual earners, where the mother is also an earner and the father is also an earner. The child gets very least time, control, love, and that warmth around the parent for a longer duration. These children are usually controlled by nannies, or probably there is an older set of like grandparents available for children. So parents do not provide any sort of norms, any sort of rules of the society, any rules of the family are not given to children. Also, the amount of love also gets deflected when we talk about this style. When speaking of the four, a lot of researchers states that authoritative style is one of the best styles that we have because there is a lot of warmth, which is high in nature, and also control. We do not lose control with the amount of love. So that's one of the best ones that we have. Then one's immediate family is also responsible for inculturation and socialization, including siblings. There's a process of mutual socialization that happens with siblings and child. So you need to know a sibling involves a whole lot of experiences that a child gets. Sibling pass on their set of beliefs is if it's the elder sibling, and if it's the younger sibling, the younger sibling takes away their belief of being a child, how the life has been, how the experiences have been, how the behaviors have been as a child in that family. So there is passing and transmission of rules, of behaviors, of belief systems, of attitude, which was stated by Zonko and Goldring in 1995. Also, in some families, having a large number of children and older siblings may take on the responsibilities of taking and caregiving of the younger siblings and sisters. So, you will find that the elder sibling does have a parental figure. There's a whole set of responsibilities that come to them, and the younger ones are always treated as young buds in the family, and also by the siblings are treated as friends. So the kind of learning and the kind of comfort and love the younger sibling gets is imparallel to anything. And when we talk about the elder siblings also gets the same sort of control, the same sort of image like the parental figure. So see, having siblings also has a huge impact on your growth and your development and your social behavior. Now, speaking of peer relationships also have a huge impact. We need to know as soon as the child turns 9 and 10, uh, right from the family to the social world of school and a setup which could be a play setup, the peer now becomes an essential part. 9 plus, peers are one of the most important part of a child's life. So it can be both challenging and supportive. Being accepted by other children is such an important source of affirmation and social validation. We all know if you have a friend group that accepts every flaw, every achievement with pride, are something that's going to add so much to the self esteem of the child. So let's take an example. A child has a group which is very comforting, very, very accepting, embracing both of the flaws and the achievement, and they take each other as each other's pride. Remember, this will add a lot of positive self esteem in the child. And in comparison to peers which reject their friends, they but peer rejection can also overshadow later behavioral problems. So a peer which is very negating of your behavior and very critical of your, let's take an example, there's a group which is very critical of each other, telling all the flaws every time, rejects one another. This can increase later behavioral issues in the child, which is very true. That's the reason parents are so particular of the kind of friends children make in the beginning. That's why parents are so choosy and they keep telling their children, you should not be with them, you should not be with this friend and that friend, because of the fact that peer rejection, getting neglected from friends, not getting the kind of acceptance that you should from the friends, can create behavioral issues and probably psychological disorders and issues like that in children. Then coming to what other kind of impact that a peer can give, social comparison with peers is also equally important for child's development. The reason that social comparison is needed, until we do not have someone who can equally compete with us in our skills, in our knowledge, in our educational, in our personal qualities, there is no sense of comparison, there is no sense of competition. The child does not want to measure or level themselves up. That's the reason a good, healthy competition as a social comparison and peer group is very essential. Also, with the approaches, as children approach adolescent, peer relationship does become a center focus. You should see a peer grouping in in an adolescent time is one of the most essential thing. Their psychological intimacy, their personal disclosure, sharing information, their vulnerabilities, sensitivities, loyalty towards people and towards themselves actually is a complete outlook from adolescent. So adolescent actually plays a very important part because I feel for peer grouping for adolescents, sorry, becomes a very important part. And a good healthy peer group, even in children, is important for growth, a development, holistic development, and not create any later behavioral issues. And for peer development, is extremely important for them to be competent, to be self-accepting, to be a positive individual, which a teenagers can develop if they have a very comforting friend group. So this finishes with the support of peer relationship that impacts enculturation. Now, coming to the differences that we had in the last page also. What is enculturation and acculturation? Acculturation is going to be another kind of social behavior that happens within culture. Enculturation is acquisition of your own culture through observation, through just simply availability of that culture. Acculturation is a very interculture. It is an amalgamation of two cultures. So it's an intercultural relationship. Enculturation is an essential requirement for survival, which is very true. If you want your culture to move from one generation to the other, enculturation is needed. Acculturation is not essential. There are so many people who do not travel at all. They probably have been born and brought up at the same place, living, earning, dying at the same place. So, acculturation is not an essential thing. It does not happen with so many of us. And enculturation, on the other, is the first familiarization process that happens in culture, which is very true. Enculturation begins as soon as the child is born. The child starts observing, learning things to enculturation. So it is one of the first familiarization the child has. Enculturation is not the first, but the second or the third familiarization, or probably to some cultures it's not present only. When children are staying in the same country, city for all life, there isn't any sort of enculturation that we have. Then let's even understand when we're talking about enculturation, it looks very similar to socialization. See, enculturations, as I said, basic process, look at the image, takes place by observation. Whereas socialization takes place through interaction. I'll give you an example for this. A child learning how to cook by watching a mother is enculturation. And socialization, when we talk about socialization, takes place through taking your children to a social gathering with you, telling and making them learn how to greet and meet. And on the other hand, enculturation doesn't need any direct teaching. You don't, children just observe. There isn't any teaching to be done that, see, this is what is happening. That's not required. Whereas socialization does require a direct teaching. There are parents, peers, teachers telling us this is important to learn. This is an important thing. Third, enculturation is a process of cultural surrounding, and socialization is effects visible by the accepted behavior. So, enculturation is also happens because it is available. Socialization will happen when you do a behavior which is accepted, and that's how you get another opportunity of interaction. So, socialization is dependent on accepted behavior, enculturation is not. Socialization is one of the most important skills which are required, and primary socialization is sometimes called enculturation also. You will realize a little bit of points are very different in the image, but the image is trying to tell you they are seemingly similar, but do have a thin line between one another. So always remember, enculturation is something that you cannot neglect. It is bound to happen. Socialization to some children might not ever happen because they're not given that opportunity to interact in a social gathering, move to a social gathering. No direct teaching is being given to them. So that finishes with the difference and peer impact on enculturation. Now let's move to the few last impact on enculturation. Education is also a process facilitating learning. It helps in acquiring knowledge, skills, belief systems, and habits. So when we talk about education per se, has a huge impact on enculturation. Why we have these, group discussions, we have storytelling habits, training, teaching, and training, directed researches. All of this allow us to learn a specific belief, a skill. So education frequently take place under the guidance of educators, but learners may also educate themselves. As we said, enculturation happens through observation. So maximally you will find that children have teachers around them, but at times education just happens without teachers. So education can take place in a formal, informal setting, and any experience that has formative effect on the way one thinks, feels, act may be considered educational. So anything that impacts you in an educational surrounding, makes changes in your early years of life, the way you see the world, the way you think about it, is also considered educational. John Dewey stated that there are some of the most important, roles of education, which is prevalent in our society. So, what does education do to us? It gives cultural transmission. Obviously, it minimizes inequality. Education is a very big tool to eradicate discrimination. So, it actually minimizes inequality. It gives us social adaptability and social change. So, when we talk about changes in terms of having learning something in any setup, social adaptability is one of the most important thing. If you're not able to adapt to a new environment, lacking that will make you learn. So that learning is again an education, and acquisition of new knowledge always comes from education, and personal development, holistic development is complete when a child is educated. So these were some of the most relevant roles of education on us. So this is being given by John Dewey in 1899, and then it was obviously, as the generation and times changes, it was adapted in 1916 for us. Now coming to the last impact on enculturation. Enculturation is also impacted by religion. As it is impacted by education, we need to know that religion is also one of the most important and separate entity. Religious advocates would say that values as well as education to children and educational institute encourage religiosity in children. So at times, learning to be a part of a system, which is a religion, gives us many values, many learnings, which tells us a positive way of living. Like we have so many of them. We have Judaism in ancient Israel, Torah, and in Torah, instructed and encouraged learning and literacy. And when we move to European countries, we need to know these European countries are so culturally abided that their language is a must in any of the teaching capacity. So any course that you do, their language is always going to be a part of it. So see how religion can also impact your education. They've already given a context, which is the text of Judaism in the Asian Assyrian Torah. So that's a must to be learned. That's how, when we talk about political science, we are learning about so many policies which is in India. How did all the policy system and constitution was made in India? When we talk about historical facts, we talk about revolutions being studied in India. How did the Mughal, the French Revolution happen? So this is a part of our education, which also includes religion in between. How different cultures set have a religious system, which gives them a specific knowledge as per their religion. So the schools, however, it's also found like in the early times how there was a bifurcation of genders that only boys were allowed in education system. Now, understanding that enculturation happens through peers, through schools, through religion, education, and obviously family, let's move to self. How does our self changes across culture? So, as the topic is about self, culture, and social behavior, let's understand the different selves that you have in the culture. So there are three kinds of selves that you need to learn. One is sense of self, which is in an individualistic society. Then there's a sense of self, sense of self in a collectivistic society. So if we differentiate it in a simple pattern, you will always find individualistic societies to be technologically brighter, technologically one step ahead of us. So these are Western societies to be considered. They focus on individual goals. They are much more independent. They considered independent sense of self to be something which is a core value in a group. Even in a group, even if they're working together, individual goal satisfaction is something that they prioritize, and they're more focused on individual growth and life. When we talk about collectivistic societies, these are Eastern societies, which are Asian societies per se. India can also come here, and these are culture which encourages more collectivistic view, more holistic view, and interdependent running of people, which is interdependent goals, interdependent lifestyles, and an interdependent sense of self. We do tend to take the Eastern countries and a non-European, European country cultures to be technologically lesser advanced than the one which are individualistic. So these are the two kinds of selves that you need to know, which was given by Marcus and Kitayama in 1991. Now let's understand how do we differentiate these two kinds of self on various parameters. So the first parameters, you can even see there are seven comparative parameters between individualistic and collectivistic societies. Self perception. Speaking of the collectivistic view, self perception is together, working together. They always see them as joint entities. Remember, individualistic societies see each other as something which is individual, something which is single, and something which is focusing on themselves. So it's not conjoined here. Then, speaking of social explanation, which is next, social explanation of sense of self comes in when we talk about individualistic society. Here, the sense of self is completion of individual goals. So, social explanation would be we are a part of a social gathering to complete our goals. Whereas when we talk about collectivistic view, they are together to complete each other's goal. Now, motivation to achievement. Collectivistic view are achieving in relationship to the other people. It's always a group goal. It's always a goal together. When we talk about something which is what do you call this? When we talk about the individualistic societies, they see motivation to achievement as speed, minimal move, individual achievement. So they are motivated to take care of individual and self-focusing achievement. Then there is self-enhancement. Self-enhancement in collectivistic will always come with people, and in individualistic, it comes what you learn alone in a group. What are your skills? What are your tasks individually? Then social implication of emotion and social implication of indigenous emotion and happiness. Happiness, in a social society is seen when the entire group is happy, when the entire group is collectively reached a goal. Your happiness is self. So it's going to be what you have done to achieve that sense of completion and happiness in an individualistic goal. Whereas when we talk about the collectivistic, the happiness and an emotion is dependent on the other people. That's why in Indian society, a family is such a huge construct. because it talks about goals together, love together, happiness together. So you feel good when an entire family works together and gets something. So that's an example of collectivistic society, which is obviously the Eastern countries that we talk about. So this is self and culture, which is how there are two kinds of self across culture. Now, you can even see some differences. We have collective goals in collectivists, we have personal goals in individualism. Importance of social community is very high, whereas here there is individual completion, materialistic goals that you have. Collectivistic people, or as we talk about achievement, it's together. So there's going to be less competition, less comparison. These people are a little low in self esteem and self concept because everything is interdependent. If the group has something which is a collective self esteem, then it's going to be high, else there is low self esteem, and they're more social. When we talk about individualistic, they're high competence, they have very high self esteem, they're more self centered. So that finishes with the two kinds of self that we have across culture, which is individual and collectivistic. Now let's move to multicultural identities. There are three kind of identities which was given by Hogg and Morris, and one identity is interpersonal, the other is intra, and the other is collective. So as we have a self, how does that self identify in the culture? We can either identify interpersonally, intrapersonally, or collectively. So, what are intrapersonal levels of multicultural identities? See, competent identification with multicultural was found to be positive outcomes for adjustment in psychological as well as socio-cultural domains. So, they speculated that positive acculturation would lead to a positive internal factors also and external factors, which is very true. So acculturation was adapting two cultures together. So whenever people they suggest intra is within you. So at an intra level, if you have a very positive acculturation, which is the amalgamation of your culture and a Western culture when you move abroad to education has been very good. What will happen? Your internal factors like your social support will grow, your lingual proficiency will grow. You can talk in multilingual language, and external factors that also proves to be good for intrapersonal is the state policies discouraging prejudice. If the passport policies and the visa policies are very good for that country, that will support you to have a better acculturation and a better intrapersonal level. There are differences among bicultural individuals seen in terms of distance, dissociation between two cultures, conflict between two cultures, and simply stated that low distance and low conflict could lead to reduced anxiety within the bicultural individuals. So they are trying to tell us that as an intracultural identity, what do you feel inside highly is dependent upon the kind of interaction that you have with another culture, which is acculturation. It could be because of internal factors. What kind of support are you getting? If you are able to adapt yourself with the kind of language systems which are there, and at the same time when we talk about this, even the external factors will increase or decrease your intraculture. The policy, the visa policies across the country, if there is no conflict between the perception of the cultures that you're a part of, it's going to be a good intraculture identity. Then we have an interpersonal level in which influences broadly the identity that others focus on encountering of multicultural identity. So because inter is more about other people, it's about you and others. Inter is always interaction between people. So your encounters in a multicultural makes a interpersonal identity. So discrepancies in the perception of self and others about one's identity could lead to difficulties. So it's about interpersonal. So, for example, if you're interacting with a person of a different identity and there are some misconceptions, some notions in the mind that could lead to wrong and not leading you to develop an interpersonal identity, which is your interaction with people, multicultural identities is going to go down. Then coming to collectivistic levels are like a two policy discussed above in the context. Here, the inter and the multicultural function together. So this is that level of identity where there's a positive self-esteem if the multicultural identities are going great, and if you're able to indulge with multiple identities of the society, that's considered to be high self-esteem. You are, an individual who's not going to be at the risk of any sort of minority group. It reduces stereotypes. So intercultural policies results from and interculturalistic policies are a result of dissatisfaction from multicultural policies. So interculturalistic policies will arise only if you have dissatisfaction at a collective level in multicultural. So let's take an example. A child moves out of India, interacts with many people in their college. I'm sure in a college system you have multicultural people. So you tend to preserve a lot of knowledge, learn about traditions, interact with one another. That leads to a positive self-esteem because you're accepted, you're liked by people. That's going to reduce the minority, but for example, if there is a result of interculturality, that you're protecting your culture, you don't want to discuss about your culture. Other people are very hideous; they don't want to discuss about their culture. This leads to dissatisfaction. You might not be in a good harmony with other people, and it could lead to a low, collectivistic level of thought. So, three identities that you can form: an intra, which can be both positive, negative, in inter, and a collective. Collective talks about multicultural, which is positive, and if it happens to be intercultural, it is a little negative. So that means two identities from the kind of self. Now let's move to the social behavior across cultures. So you need to know, we are just going to now talk about how behaviors are different across cultures. So as you see on the text, first let's talk about social behavior across culture. See, culture does control the way you think, the way you see a society, the way you see people and bond with other people, and how do you interact with the group. So the first thought that a culture gives a social activity is in group and out group. What I'm trying to say is the first behavior that we end up doing in a cultural system is form a group. So the group that you have formed is becoming the in group, and the way you consider and take the other groups as a social behavior turns out to be an out group. So it could be either an in group or an out group. In groups are something that you identify with, you feel connected with, you feel belong to. This could be your caste, your religion, your community group where you're doing charitable work, your family, your basketball team, your football team, etc. Now, the outgroup is something that you do not identify with. It could be a competing team also. It could be a team where you do not belong to, a friend group that you do not belong to, a culture or a community, religious community that you do not belong to. So it also can be two competing football teams. The football team themselves, A, feels that I'm the in group, and B is inferior. I don't like them. I don't connect with them. Would be an out group. Then let's understand, when we understand that these are the kind of social behavior happening as soon as a culture that you go to, there are some cross-cultural differences also of group membership. As this is the last unit, it will talk about how your social behavior differs in different culture. So first is stability. Stability of a group membership varies across culture. Some cultures do consider stability to be a very good aspect. Some people feel that dynamic nature is more important. So in North Americans generally have a stable in groups and out group membership in comparison to Asian culture. You will find that Asian cultures keep deflecting from in groups and out groups. Their ideas and opinions keeps changing. Wherein when we talk about North Americans, there is a stability of once a social behavior of in group and out group is formed. They're very stable about it. Then also communication with out group in a collectivistic culture depends obviously on highly situational factor because it's a collectivistic culture, and it talks about many cultures coming together and interacting, while situational demands do not play an important role in the individualistic culture, which is very true. When we talk about a culture where you are collective in nature, which is you are working together with many cultures, remember your culture is going to highly depend on situational factors because situations can impact different cultures differently. So collectivistic view might get impacted. But when an individual culture, why will they get impacted by situations? They know what they want. They know my individualistic culture is about being concerned in self-focus. Situations and demands of situation do not impact them much. Then, in relationship to communication and interaction with their own members. Collectivistic group has obviously prolonged interaction because of the fact there are many cultures here. So collectivistic group usually take themselves as together, take themselves like family. So obviously the interaction is more prolonged. Like Indian families tend to, during a function, which is, let's talk about during a festival, tends to connect with everybody, right from their uncles to their little siblings to their aunts to their grandparents. So that is a collectivistic view. Interaction and communication here is very important, and it's very prevalently happening all the time. Whereas in individualistic cultures, which is American students, it was found that they have very fewer interaction. So yes, connecting with everybody is not important, but connecting to the near and dear ones is something which is important. So that is again a difference between the individualistic culture and collectivistic culture. We can just bifurcate between a Western and a non-Western culture. You will find all the difference here. Now, moving to attachment styles. This is another way that individualistic culture and collectivistic culture differentiate. Attachment styles were given by Mary Ainsworth et al. In 1978, and this also, these attachment style also came up as a strange situation experiment. There was a strange situation experiment done where there was multi-situation, and the children were a part of this experiment, and that's how they showed all of these kind of attachment when this strange situation came to them. So first, let's talk about the most positive attachment that they gave, which was the secure attachment. Secure attachment usually is ones who, those children who explore very freely. They engage with activities even with a stranger. And for example, if the mother goes away, let's talk about separation anxiety. When the mother leaves and comes back, you will find that children with secure attachment will be upset, but they will happily return to their caregiver. So this again is because of what? The kind of caregiving community or culture that you're a part of. If the culture always provides a secure attachment, a very secure base, the child will develop a secure attachment. Then moving to ambivalent. Ambivalent is even called resistant attachment style. This vary from situation to situation. In general, particularly stranger, and stays close or even clings to caregiver rather than exploring the toys. So they are very ambivalent, which is they're very resistant. Um, they show very different odd behaviors to a stranger. Then they might go close to their parent caregiver and they cling to them rather than enjoying the toys. And when the parent caregiver leaves, the child is extremely in distress, and the and is ambivalent when the caregiver comes back. Ambivalent is they cling to the caregiver, then they leave it, then they move to the toys, and then they stay close, then they move away again. So it's a very a very midway sort of thing. They do enjoy the caregiver when they return, and they also show odd behaviors. So that is resistant. The upsetting nature is the distress is showing you a little bit of resistance. Then we talk about avoidant attachment. These are usually coming in individualistic communities because, see, uh, at times what happen is as soon as the child is detached from the mother, the child will ignore the mother when they come back for a while, show very little emotions, and the mother departs and returns. So you will see that these children tend to be very distant from their mother when the mother returns. Because of the upsetting nature, they will ignore their mother for a while. So this is suggested as the avoidant attachment. And I would not suggest this can be available both in the individualistic culture also, and also in the interculturalistic identities where we do not really get well with the other communities. Also, now a child with disorganized and disoriented attachment style seems to be inconsistent in coping. You will find them in stress in most of the situation. When their parents go, when they meet a stranger, when the parents come back, they are still in distress. So this could also be a part of both collectivistic culture also and individualistic culture also. At times, living in a collectivistic culture might confuse a child. So this could lead to disorientation in styles. So this was attachment styles, which is equally important in social psychology and even in social behaviors. Now, let's see the image here. See the secure children usually are very self-assured, very direct and very responsive. The ones which are very dismissive are self-reliant, avoidant, which is the avoidant one. They are very distinct from people because they have experience in avoidant style of attachment. They tend to be more, reliant on themselves. That's why I said avoidant attachment is more individualistic. They are very self-focused. They tend to rely on themselves. Then there is the one which is anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is ambivalent, which is self doubting. They become very sensitive. They show odd behaviors. They cling to the mother. They leave the mother. They're attached to the toys. They're a little preoccupied because of that. Then we come to disorganized, which is self, they are unpredictable. They usually stay in stress situation. They isolate themselves. They distinct themselves. They self sabotage themselves. So they're also considered to be very fearful styles. So these were social behaviors differentiated on the basis of the kind of attachment styles that you get as a child. Then let's come to a social identity theory, again a part of social behaviors, which was given by Tajfel. Tajfel in 1979 proposed that groups which people belong to were an important source of pride and self-esteem, which is very true. So when we talk about having identities, having a kind of social behavior in a group do gives us a lot of things. It gives us security, self-esteem, a sense of pride. So belonging to a group gives us a social identity, a sense of belongingness to the world. So two major things a group will satisfy, Tajfel stated, was an identity and something which was belongingness. Tajfel also proposed that stereotyping, which is putting people in categories in group, is also based on the normal cognitive processes, the tendency to group things together. Humans usually, whenever we move to a new society, a new culture, we have this habit of categorizing people. And that's the reason stereotyping is something which is very common in group settings. In doing so, what do? We tend to form differences between group. That's how you form an in-group and an out-group. And that's how you find that which is your in-group. The one which is going to be very similar to you will give you an in-group. So because of these stereotyping, this categorization, you're able to differentiate between groups and find similarity in the same group and find your in-group and out-group. After that, you need to know social identity theory also gives us processes. How do we identify ourselves? The first is social categorization. It's very simple. Let's take an example. In a social surrounding, you go to a party where there are, let's take interculture and multiculture. Multiculture is many cultures, and inter is interaction with the people has to happen. So there are both the identities there. Now, the first thing that you will do is categorization, which is social categorization, which is dividing the social world in different categories. So obviously, something which is more relevant to yourself is self-relevant. Then you're going to find another group, which is a second party, and then the third group, which is, categorizing the groups into the relevance to you. This is one, this is two, this is three. Then after you have categorized, you start comparing. There is social comparison that tends to happen. People are motivated to obtain positive social identity through positive intergroup social comparison. So you see, this first group is my group. I'm in this in group, and my group is more capable, better members. We are all highly compatible. So you start comparing it with others. After the social comparison, you have a boost to self-esteem. You feel better about yourself. There is a formation of social identity, which is a positive social identity is formed, which gives you pride and esteem together. So see how a social identity is formed within groups. This is how you do it. You do social categorization, you do social comparison, and lastly, you form a social identity. This concept was given by Tajfel in 1978. Let's move to some other aspects which tends to happen in relationship to people or groupings, and this is attribution is a theory where we talk about social cognition, where we think we understand people. Social cognition is what? Social cognition is forming impression about people, attributing, and then behaving. So attribution theory is concerned with how ordinary people explain the cause and events of anyone's behavior and even their own behavior. So, for example, is if someone is angry because they are bad tempered or because something bad happened. So, did you see the two contradiction here? We tend to find the cause of the people behind people's behavior on the basis of two things. First is personal. okay, this person is always angry. It's his nature, it's his temperament, personality. You are attributing the cause internally. Then the second could be, oh, this person is happy, he had a horrible day today. The day actually made him do so. So you are saying that the situation is leading him or her to do so. So this is now external. The first example that we stated is angry because of their own temperament is internal. Then we talk about fundamental attribution error, which is errors in your attribution capacity. So either you can attribute someone internally, which is attributing to their personality, to their kind, and one is externally, which is completely based on situation. The situation was bad, that's why this happened. That's why this behavior came out. So fundamental attribution is an error, which is also known as over attribution and correspondence bias. It is a tendency for people to overemphasize on personality based explanation for behaviors observed in others while over underemphasizing the situational explanation. What are they trying to say? Fundamental attribution and correspondent bias is a kind of error. Whenever we see other people's behavior, no matter it's a success, no matter it's a failure, we will always attribute it to their personality. Let's take an example. There is water spilled on the floor and somebody falls down, right? Someone falls down. You attribute, if it's a fundamental attribution error, the child is always very messy, fell down, did not see the water. The child is very responsible. What did we do? Over personally, dispositionally emphasized on their internal attribution. We are not focusing on the fact, on the situational factors that there is water over there. Another example, someone did not score good marks. So if a teacher is fundamentally attributing, would say the child is always irresponsible, never studying, never focusing on education. Internal attribution. Disposition, personality. You don't see that the paper itself was so difficult. The child is averagely scored on a paper which was very high to according to his level. We underemphasize the situation. In other words, cognitive biases to assume that a person's action depends on the kind of person he is rather than the influence of external or environmental or situational factors. There are cross cultural studies that indicate cultural differences are there in attributional style, while Western researchers hypothesize that individuals only attribute success to internal factors and obviously failures to external factors. So we do, Western cultures did stated, whenever we're attributing our success, we will be, I worked hard. I'm a very hardworking person. And when it's a failure, how will you attribute? Like the image, situational attribute. This behavior was caused because the paper was very difficult. The teacher doesn't like me. So this is situational attribution. So your failures are situation and your successes are internal. So this is attribution. Let's move to aggression to be one of the last kind of thought that we have about how aggression can differ in a social construct. See, aggression is a overt expression, can be physical and psychological. It changes people's perception about you. It changes people's thought about you. There are several factors that define and determine aggression. Collectivistic and individualistic view stated that individualistic culture have a strong influence towards violence, which is very true. Individualistic culture are all very self-focused, so they are more driven towards aggression. Whereas, if the individualistic cultures are more economically better, they will be reduced towards aggression. On comparison, collectivistic view are lesser in aggression as compared to individualistic societies. Economic situations are better. So remember, if the economic situations are better, you will be lesser moving towards violence, rights, and similarly happens with democratic societies. Societies which has a very planned, smooth democracies will not move towards war, will not move towards instability. So this is again how a social behavior is dependent, which is aggression dependent on economic stability, democracies, collective and individualistic expressions. Now, moving to the last that we have, which is the person perception. Person perception is how do we perceive people. Remember, it is the judgment that you form about people. This again constantly keeps changing. Individuals evaluate the form of perception the way they are shaped according to the information which is available to you. This also differs in a social, judgment. If you're coming from an individualistic view, your personal perception will completely depend on the kind of information that you get from the person. If it's a collectivistic view, remember, how you form an impression about person will depend upon various factors. Other people's thought, other people's opinion, conclusion from others. This lastly finishes how social behavior is something which depends on our culture and also the kind of self and identities that we form. This finishes with the introduction and social psychology as a complete unit, which is BPCC 132. Hope you all understood. Thank you.